Okay, understanding the energy of chaos and the frequency of rest.
Yeah.
That sounds so big, but when we were discussing what to title the second segment in a way that would be comprehensive and telling of the things we would discuss, it occurred to me that years ago when I was at UCI, I was going from lecture hall to lecture hall one particular year. It was towards the end of my tenure there, my time there. And I was just in one particular lecture hall, and I remember what I was wearing. I remember who was sitting next to me. I remember everything in that room because I heard that quiet, still voice saying, no, what I'm hearing is not resonating with me. This is a bridge too far for me and a step too many.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, something's wrong here. Something's wrong here. They're asking me to not believe what I see, but embrace what they're telling me or consider what they're telling me. And something just wasn't setting well with me.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a statistics professor that entire year who was a classical educator. And we did not have a statistics book. We had to do our own regression, design our own research project, write all the regression analysis, and do the regression analysis all longhand. And we were not allowed to use a calculator in the process. And our final that year was the 3/4, the volumes we'd compiled over 3/4, open book, open note, open everything. And there were 3 questions, I think. And the final was it was 3 hours, something like that. It was a long final. It's comprehensive. And I'd studied, I was so prepared, and I was so terrified because I had calculated that I only had room to make maybe 1 or 2 mistakes, and I'd better catch them pretty quick because I wouldn't have enough time to go and recalculate everything.
Right, yeah.
And so in class, I had a full-on anxiety attack. But my eyes, it attacked my eyes, not my lungs. And I couldn't see. And I had to go like this and feel my way. I'll never forget this. I had to feel my way to the front of the lecture hall and go up on the stage. And of course, I started crying. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't see. And he said, Virginia, get all your books, get everything from your work area, and why don't you go home and have a nice summer? Call me when you're ready to take your final. And of course, I felt bad and I wanted to do it. I was prepared and I just couldn't. My entire body shut down. You talk about confusion, chaos, and disease, and your body's saying no more.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, I probably stayed up a few nights in a row and just, slept 30 minutes throughout the day and whatever. But I thought I would be a statistician for the rest of my life. Because the way he taught me how to reason and the analysis that I had to do to understand the predictability and the reoccurrence of things, whatever I wanted to do in my project, patterns was remarkable. And I really began to understand the lawfulness and the structure and the order of things that sustained life.
Right. Yeah.
And that's when I really began to understand that the sciences were birthed on these laws of nature, these things that were self-evident. And it so spoke to my natural affection that nothing was random or relative, except my opinion. but certainly not truth. And I was captivated. And then I realized this is why I was feeling so much confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in these lecture halls. They were asking me to disregard this internal gauge.
Right, yeah.
I mean, we're told that the law of God is written in our hearts and the conscience bears witness. But I'm hearing something that is in direct conflict with this other thing that I don't understand
so now
inside
you have
of
discord.
me. Discord.
And you've come out of harmony.
And I came out of harmony, and I was in a state of dis-ease, climaxing when I stinking had to go take my statistics final. But I'll tell you, I fell in love with him. I fell in love with information. I fell in love with knowledge. And one of my mentors, well, the mentor that's had the most significant influence in my life, I've had 3 or 4 amazing human beings pour into me. But she said to me years ago, Virginia, you're a reluctant scholar and academic. You just will not have it. You will not step into this.
You don't want the label.
No, because I don't want the label. I don't want anything because I'm kind of wild.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I love that quote from Einstein.
Yeah.
That imagination is more important than knowledge.
Absolutely, yeah.
And somehow I came into sync and that resonated with me.
Yeah.
But some of the information I was getting from my classes, it's like, no, it was an assault to the balance, harmony, and coherence now that I know of things that sustained my very life. And it made me uncomfortable. Right. And for the last 40 years of my life, I don't know if I told you this or not, I had just embarked in this state of dissatisfaction. I'm 63, so I was about 23 coming out of this whole academic experience, getting ready to go into graduate school. I was in a PhD, master's PhD program. And I thought, no, hard stop. Something's really wrong. And believe it or not, my pilgrimage of rest took me through many interesting paths, but that's how I got here. Yeah. So when I met you and I heard about your work, and you talked about energy and chaos, frequencies of rest, I thought, this guy put into music everything that didn't resonate with me during lecture halls and the presentation of material and all that. By the way, barring religious discussions, it was a violation of something that put me in a state of dis-ease. And then my statistics professor, which I thought I hated that class and I was going to perish in it, or certainly have a heart attack before I died, he made me fall in love with math. And then it occurred to me, I am a reluctant
scholar,
thinker. And I do love the academics and the discourse, but it's not just me. It's everybody. I see it in children. I see it in middle-aged people. I've seen it in homeless people that I've talked to. I see it in everything because that's what's sacred about our humanity, this balance, harmony, and coherence between our spirit, our soul, and our body, and how it all works together to sustain and advance our life. Yeah. And rest is just a way that I have, this reconstitution approach to healing that I developed over 40 years, aggressively in the last 10, 15, that put together all these moving pieces. So it took me 40 stinking years of my life to think, to breathe and say, I'm whole and I'm thriving and everything there in the universe is there to be had. And it's not about being a scholar or an academic. It's about understanding things that you have composed. So take it from here.
Well, I would just comment that you're a wild academic.
Yeah,
so,
that's what they say.
And a wild scholar. So there's a difference because a lot of, quote, scholarship is very programmed. And that's what you were resisting.
Confinement,
That's what you were resisting. And that's the same thing with me with music. I learned to read music when I was taking my piano lessons. But I tell people all the time, music gets in my way. It takes away the creativity. I was in a harp circle one summer, just it was near us, and it was easy to go to, and I had to read music to be part of that, to play those pieces they were playing. It was very confining. And one day we were all talking about what each one of us did, and I told them I had all my CDs and everything, and well, where's your music? I said, well, I don't have music. And they said, what? You play by ear? Yeah. Oh, I'd give anything to be able to play by ear. And I began to realize that is maybe part of the uniqueness that I've been given in the design that was placed within me.
You're picking up that information.
Yeah, so that I'm free to hear what I hear and then translate it onto the strings, And so I think that's part of the process. It's interesting, kind of going back to the story I was relaying in the last session, in that realizing there was this physiological effect. I was reading in the ancient text about David, a shepherd boy, that was brought in to play for this King Saul that had kind of gone crazy. He was very
lost his mind.
He lost his mind. He would be in a mental ward if it was today. And but they brought David in, and he started playing for the king, and it says that his troubling spirit left when the music was going on. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I wonder if that's related to what I'm observing in my patients. And so my next question was, well, this David Shepherd, he's responsible for writing there's an ancient text called the Psalms. A lot of people enjoy the Psalms because they seem to speak to a lot of our human condition. And
boy, do they.
Yeah, do they ever. And so I said, well, does anybody know what his Psalms, is there music to the Psalms? Is there some music, some sheet music? And because I thought, if I could tap into what he was doing, maybe that would be even more beneficial, And so...
More healing.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, we were going over to Israel in 2006. And I thought, well, I'm there. I'm going to just talk to rabbis and archaeologists and musicians and artists and whoever will talk to me. Does anybody know what the music sounded like? Is there a record of that somewhere? And the short answer was no. Nobody had found a sheet music in an archaeological dig. But there was a harp maker in Jerusalem. His name is Mika Harari. And he had a little 22-string harp that he made. And he took one of the Hebrew letters. There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And he took one letter, carved it at the base of each string. And his idea was that if somebody was not really a musician, they could still go to the psalm and play the psalm letter to note, letter to note, letter to note, like that. So I said, well, that's an interesting idea. Do you know which note goes to which letter? And he said, well, I just started at the bottom, went to the top. But it gave me an idea that there was possibly a relationship between the musical scale and the alphabet. So when I came home, I started working with that idea. And then I was searching through the internet, and I found Leonard Horowitz. We've talked about Leonard
Dr.
quite a
Horowitz,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah. He and Joseph Puleo wrote a book, Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse, and we could probably put a picture up of that. It's still available today.
I'll put it on the website.
Yeah, put it on
Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse. Yeah.
And in that, there's a chapter where Joseph Puleo said he got a direct download on this information about how there's a place in this ancient text of Scripture that gives patterns of 3-digit numbers.
Is that number 7?
Numbers chapter 7.
It's chapter 7.
And there's these repeats that take place, and when you're looking at Hebrew text, whenever you see repeats, it's a kind of a flashing sign that you need to pay more attention. There's more information here than just cursively reading it. And so I looked at that chapter, and I really started internalizing those ideas that he was bringing forth. And what it really does is it brings you to 6 different notes that are revealed there within that scripture of chapter 7. And notes are always listed, they're defined by hertz. Hertz is the number of vibrations per second. And so there's 6 notes that are described there. And then he also took that to Psalm 119, and that's an acrostic psalm that every 8 verses has the first letter of the first word of each verse begins with the first 8 is Aleph, and then Bet, Gimel, Dalet, all
Patterns
the way,
of 8 all the way down.
through. Yeah. So the very first letter of the first word of each of those verses is that letter of the alphabet. And so that by bringing the notes over to the alphabet, then there was the correlation between which note goes to which letter. And that's what I've been working on now. So each word, Hebrew word, is a chord. And when you go from word to word to word, you have chord progression, which is how the compositions that I work with now are coming straight out of the psalm.
You said something when you were discovering the patterns in Numbers chapter 7.
Right.
You found the 6 notes.
Right. So in Numbers chapter 7, we end up with 6 frequencies described. A frequency is the number of vibrations per second.
And you find them repeated 4 different times.
4 different times, yeah. So it's not just double, it's a 4 times repeat. So in other words, it's just flashingly, glaringly at you. This is really important.
4 flashes.
Yeah. So the first number, first hertz, is 396. Interestingly, when you add those together, 3 plus 9 is 12, plus 6 is 18, 8 plus 1 is 9. And what I just did was called Pythagorean math, okay? So you take a multi-digit number and keep adding until you get it down to 1 digit, okay? So then the next one is 417. 4 plus 1 is 5, plus 7 is 12, which equals 1 plus 2, which equals 3. So all of the notes that we'll see, I'll just give the frequencies, is 396, 417, 528, which I think is the most important one, 639, 741, and 852. When you add those down, Pythagorean number, down to a single digit, all of them end up being either a 3, a 6, or a 9, which got your attention.
It did, because about 5 years ago, I walked in the office, and of course, I'm walking with this rest narrative in my head, emerging, developing, testing, questioning. And one day I walked in and I said, "You guys, I just figured something out. I can explain rest in 3 numbers, 3, 6, 9. And they all looked at me with a blank look in their face.
369.
I know, I didn't know. And then they all looked at me with this blank look. Oh no, here we go again. Virginia's going to go on one. She's on one. And I said, no, really. I just realized why we get the results we do and why we see the transformation we see.
Right.
Because in comes my statistics professor in my head and those longhand calculations. I said, I think in short order, I'm going to be able to write an entire mathematical equation that can explain why stepping into a place of rest will set you free.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they kind of go, oh no, okay. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, I'm not sure yet. I don't know. It's just coming to me.
It's coming.
Well, it was raining. I came home and I passed 3 or 4 Teslas, and I thought, who the heck is Tesla? I mean, who names a car Tesla? There's got to be a story behind this.
And there is.
And there is. I had a long week, and I came home. It was raining, and I thought, I literally heard that quiet, still voice saying, go to Netflix. Netflix has a story on everybody. I'm not a big Netflix person. I'm not a big TV person, but I went and I turned on Netflix, and I spoke into my remote. Tesla. Who's Tesla? And I will never forget, within the first 3-4 minutes of the production, they had Tesla quotes flashing through the screen. And he said something along the lines of 369 basically can explain the world or reality.
He also, another statement.
And I couldn't even think or hear anything after
said, if
that.
you will understand the universe, you must understand frequencies.
Right. But all I cared about that moment, Steve, was there's my number.
369.
How did Tesla...
How did he know that?
How did he know that was my number for rest? Anyway, I had to laugh at myself. And I thought, wait a minute. I've got to really think about this. But it's been years. And not till I met you... Did I understand that 369 is in every single one of those frequencies from number 7?
Yep.
That's why my clients and the patients at the clinic experience the transformative work of rest.
And interesting.
Because it is what? Balance, harmony, and coherence because of the frequency. It's a frequency.
It's all frequency and resonance.
That's crazy. It's frequency, it's resonance, it's energy. And of course, when you come see me, there's all these biometrics that I use to help bring narratives into alignment so I can help people get out of state of confusion, chaos, and disease quickly. So these biometrics and these incredible technologies that I could, one of them, I just could never come up with anything like that. It's not my thing. I'm wild in other areas. And I realized why. Now I have an explanation of why people heal.
And here's another really interesting thing to consider is we talk about chaos. Well, there are damaging frequencies as well. We're talking about healing frequencies, but there are damaging as well. And so my personal feeling is that chaos is a negative frequency that's causing damage. And so how do we take care of that? Well, we tune into the right frequency, the healthy frequencies, the healing frequencies. And that we can do that by choice.
Right. And I think I want people to understand we want to categorize everything into this lower story, upper story, as Francis Schaeffer would say.
Right.
The rational mind is here and the religious or the scholars are here and the religious zealot and everything existential is up here. But you can't have one without the other.
Right.
Since when do we have a body without a head without a body, or a heart without a head, or a head without a heart,
or a person without a spirit?
That's right. There are things that cannot be separated. Right. So one of our goals at Rest is wholeness. Help people, experience freedom. Yeah. But you can't have freedom until there's wholeness. Right. Well, wholeness is integrating your spirit, your soul, and your body, and those narratives and bringing them into alignment. But when you explained to me, well, first of all, before you explained it, I thought, why is he smiling so big? And yesterday, well, first of all, when you heard me speak about rest, I saw a big smile and I said, let me just make this simple because it can be comprehensive. It's interdisciplinary. It incorporates so many disciplines. But at the end of the day, I can explain rest with number 369. And I'm working on the equation that will substantiate the merit of this finding and why people experience transformation. And I'll never forget the smile on your face. And I thought, what the heck is he smiling about? This is like really a big deal. I'm really wrestling with this. And your smile went into this amazing explanation because it's in 369 is found in every single
one, yeah.
Every single frequency from number 7.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, see, I think what the Father has revealed to you, or what your intuitive has come to over 40 years of struggle.
God reveals this.
Yes.
The world is His and everything in it. And design bears the fingerprints of intelligence, of creativity, of
more and more science is recognizing that there has to be a design. I mean, there is a design mathematically and so many other ways. 396, go for it. if there's a design, there has to be a designer. It's just, I know Michio Kaku said, I don't believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but if you want to understand the mind of God, you got to go to mathematics because it's there. There's a pattern there. There's a system there. There's mathematics, and it explains everything. Everything can be put into an equation, and we're seeing more and more of that with the digital age. We used to have pictures that we had on film that was you had to develop and all that. Well, now it's just a whole stream of numbers, and that's a picture, And so things have changed so much, but all of that still is reflecting that there is a design, there is a designer, and when we do best is when we are following the design, because the designer knows what the pattern is that's going to be the best.
Well, understanding energy is manifested in chaos.
Right.
Yeah. Understanding that energy is manifested very quickly in chaos. You don't need a degree to figure that out.
No.
We've all stepped into situations and immediately thought something's wrong here.
Right.
We often communicate thoughts or ideas about people, places, or things and say things like, it just had bad energy. He has bad energy. She has bad energy. It has bad energy. We intuitively communicate in these ways. Right. And there's something about peace that intuitively speaks of balance, harmony, and coherence, even if we don't understand it, even if those words never crossed our mind, that facilitates
right. And it's
rest.
It's a pattern that it's interesting because you take a look at a blueprint for a house, and if that blueprint isn't followed meticulously, there will be a flaw. And you'll be able, if you're a builder or an architect or somebody that deals all the time with that flaw will be detectable very quickly. And I think that because we have a designer, that means there's a pattern. And when we deviate from that pattern, then that discord begins to come in, which is
unravel,
which we call chaos.
Unraveling, we
call chaos, yeah. And that sets up what I would call a negative frequency that's going to be out of sync with what the design is for. Mm-hmm. Even in mechanics, if you have like in an engine, if you have something that doesn't line up with what everything else is doing, it's going to cause a failure, and
it's not going to work.
Exactly.
So we can have ideas about many things and opinions about many things, and I love that discourse, even if I don't agree, because I always learn something.
Right.
But truth is the spine.
Right.
Of these laws of nature, these things that are self-evident and appeal to our natural affection. And we see it as something as simple as our car. We don't want a bunch of people with a bunch of different opinions trying to put our car together.
Right. Yeah.
We want to know that there are not only that everything's aligned and fits perfectly, but we want to know that those things have been tested,
right,
and they're tried and true and verified, and that it's gone through all this quality control. I find that so much disease happens is because we have so much liberty, that wild part of us, and that choice and the capacity to really do what we want, that the only place that doesn't apply lawful authority, truth, is when it comes to how we live, how we make decisions.
Well, as you were making,
but we have an internal gauge that's telling us, flashing red lights, saying, "Careful, something's off here, but we disregard it, we dismiss it. And that's when the system of our body, the mechanism breaks down. I guess we do kind of have a quality control now that I hear myself say this, and it's our conscience.
Well, you were talking last night about whether the flesh or the body or the
body, the mechanism,
is
the
the one
vehicle.
that's in control, or the spiritual is
part.
in control.
Yeah.
And the spiritual is like our compass, if you want to take it that way. Our conscience. You can use a lot of different words to say the same thing, but it's the one that knows what truth is. And then the body part of the flesh part of us says, well, I want to do this. And I have the freedom to go ahead and make that choice. But once I make that choice, there's cause and effect.
Well, and if that's confusing, one drives you, your flesh drives you, but your spirit compels you.
Yeah.
So one has fruit,
Who wins?
and the other, the question is who wins?
Yeah.
And that's negotiated in the soul. Energy. How do we understand the energy of chaos in the most practical way? And bring it into alignment with the frequency of rest. I ask myself these questions all the time.
Right.
How do I displace, because that's when I'm dealing with somebody with cancer, how do I displace the energy of chaos,
Cancer.
which is an insult attacking their body in the most practical way, controlled by a myriad of other complex functions that's debilitating the body, with the frequency of rest? The most practical thing I have to access is I need to bring that person to some measure of understanding of really what is magnificent and incredible and sacred about their entire constitution, their spirit, their soul, their body. I need to tell them to understand what's sacred about this, the inner workings and the mechanics of this vessel, and the integrity of the other moving parts, and their role, and not going rogue. Like your heart can't go here, your conscience here, your conscience can't be in the gutter, your heart in pursuing your dreams, and you being surrounded by a body of lying, and wonder why you have cancer and you're not healing. Like, no, there's these moving parts that have to be brought into integrity. When those two things happen, I notice that people start extending themselves grace and seeing, wait a minute, I've got a lot of natural resources to work with here to heal. And they start asking questions about God, about design, because then they start understanding not just the mechanics, but the design, the physiology, the anatomy. They start understanding physics and science and math, kind of like I did.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing to watch. So a lot of the foundations that have eroded in their lives start kind of coming together. And you know, I realize we displace a lot of ignorance. So a lot of the dumb things they do or did, and the stupidity sometimes from which they've lived or that they've embraced, all go because ignorance is not having information.
Right.
Being dumb, dumbfounded by something, is kind of acting like you do because you kind of have to wing it. But stupid is doubling down and acting like you have information that you don't have, that you've been dumbfounded by, but acting like you know what you're talking about. So those are, I often ask myself, wait, am I ignorant? Am I just dumbfounded by this? Or am I stupefied? And so it caused me to ponder those three questions. And I'll tell you, it cleared a lot of confusion, chaos, and disease in my own life. So then I thought, well, that's stepping into relational. We were made to be in relationship with our spirit, our soul, and our body, right? In the most practical way. If I'm dealing with cancer, I have to explain to people, this is where we got to find the fractures here.
Right.
In the communication. But for what sake? Because God made us to be like Him, spirit, soul, and body, to be in communion with Him. And that's why it says, we hear it said, and we all understand, hey, love your neighbor like you love yourself.
Right.
In other words, if you don't love yourself and see what's sacred about you, you can't have a concept of who God is or isn't. And so how are you supposed to love another person? So we can't come into wholeness until we heal. And I'll tell you, Steve, one of the reasons I've loved getting to know you is because we both work with very serious illness. And that's what that pilgrimage taught me, dealing with very sick people, that healing is accessible to 100% of the people that I worked with, always.
Yeah.
We don't chase a cure, we chase wholeness. And from pursuing that wholeness, that's where people go into remissions and experience freedom. It's an amazing thing to witness. Or go home, or they launch to go home. But either way, they're free.
Right. They make the choice.
Yeah.
And I kind of bouncing off what you were saying, to put it in musical terms, like this harp here, if I let it sit here for a couple of days and come back and try to play something, it wouldn't sound very good. I need to bring it back into order, as it were. And what is the order? Well, the order in musically is the frequencies, the tunes. So how do you do that? Well, you have to calibrate. You have to have some source that shows you where you're supposed to be, shows you how far you've strayed off from the path, and shows you where you need to come back to be on the path again. And then musically speaking, that would be the note comes back to the frequency that it's supposed to be.
Number 7,
Numbers
repeated
chapter 7,
4 times.
Yeah, exactly. So that's musically saying the same thing as what you were saying, is that we have to have a source that gives us the sample to which we can come to.
The gauge,
The gauge, yeah. We have to have a
baseline or something.
Exactly. And you call it calibration or whatever, but there has to be, I remember hearing a story of the fellow that had a violin that was out of tune, and he lived way out in the middle of nowhere, but he asked a radio station if they would play the A note so that he could tune. So once he got that A note, then he was able to tune his violin.
It's not relative.
No,
to what I want, you want, or my opinion.
Yeah, there's an absolute, and that goes back to what I was talking about, the pattern. The designer makes a pattern, and the pattern is designed because that creator or that designer knows what works the best, because he made the design, and everything, all of the moving pieces of that design are meant to fulfill certain functions. And if we step out of that pattern, out of that design, out of that blueprint, out of whatever you want to call it, it then leads to that chaos, to that. And if we want to come back in, then we have to look at that pattern and say, oh, this is where I strayed off. This is what come.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I often talk about the era of grace, which is unmerited favor. And I think it's best explained by what you do with music. It's by these laws that are irrefutable. But we live in the age of rest.
Right.
Something happened 24 years ago that ushered in and restored and displaced the mass confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. And I think that can be explained also, bringing everything back into balance, harmony, and coherence, if we consent, if we agree.
Yeah.
If the inner workings of our conscience brings us in compliance with the teaching of this guy that only lived, by the way, to the age of 33, began his public ministry at 30.
Yeah.
So 3 years. 3 is a huge number for us. The numbers 3, 6, and 9.
The ancient texts as well. Yeah.
And I'm going to do a whole talk on why I believe the number 3 is the fingerprint of God in time.
Yeah.
And I even think about the first 10 words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What? Matter, time, matter, space. And they're an amazing base, reference point to the Trinitarian constitution of all things that we can experience governance. And if one of those things are tweaked outside of an executive force, we believe it to be God, that set everything in motion, right? The Dark Trinity would say, or in ancient manuscripts, they would say Baal, right? Baal was what we call God. And the pagan practices of ancient times, since you brought David into all this, I mean, they worshipped Baal that was similar to God. But then there is this wild other thing that we reference as a Holy Spirit. I think it's Ashtar or something like that, part of the Dark Trinity that's a seductress. But the Holy Spirit also seduces us, right? And then, of course, there's the practice of Moloch in ancient times, which was associated with death and fire, right? But what do we see? Jesus there. And he came and sacrificed, right? And with the worship of Moloch, if I understand correctly, is like the sacrifice of life, children, whatever. It's practiced in ancient times. But I think if we're going to step into this place of rest, I do think it's important to see the Trinitarian. There's a lot of Satanists now, right? And emerging witches and everything. Well, this isn't new. It's not progressive and it's not new. We see this in ancient Babylon, right? And there's this just Trinitarian constitution of what we call the Godhead or whatever, the Trinity. And that created, designed, created, and spoke life into being. And then there's this other dark thing. You referenced it earlier in the form of the negative.
Truth of the twist.
The truth of the twist. But it's real, and it exists, and it was there,
it's
right? It's
patterned off for the true, but then it's a twist put into it to make it take it off track.
And the beauty, I think, of our humanity is we have the capacity to choose. Do we reach for those resources that expand our life, explain, expand, and give us the basis of exploration to be wild because he put everything into motion? Or this other dark Trinitarian force that is there as well, because you never know where people are that are listening, but these are realities. Sometimes we're not comfortable speaking about spiritual things, but the reality is that much of what you and I have talked about over the course of days explains good and evil. And both are there for our taking. I guess we get to choose.
We make choice.
The choice is easy when you have cancer and the conversations I can have with people. I think I'm thankful for what you've shown me about energy and displacing chaos, because I see that when a person is fighting cancer and they're spending $10,000, $15,000 a week paying for their own cancer treatment, I see that I've observed that often what they tell me is not what they feel, what they want.
What they think you want to hear.
Or they think they want. But it's when I'm able to energy test them. For example, we talked about this, a will to live. Just because you're spending the money for all these treatment doesn't mean you have a will to live.
You might be trying to fulfill an expectation of somebody else.
Or there's a secondary gain in being sick. And that secondary gain is giving you relationship, conversation, and experiences you've always wanted.
Focus,
that you never had before. It's not always awful and evil. And by the way, many times people don't understand the disparity between what their vessel is telling me and what their heart is revealing.
The discord.
The discord. And the anatomy, by the way, of disease
Right.
is the discord, the imbalance between what the body's holding on to and what people. So this concept of understanding energy in the context of chaos and understanding frequencies in the context of healing, I think is very important. It's a complicated conversation, but I hope people listening understand that as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. You're more complicated than you think. And there are laws of nature, things that are self-evident and will appeal to your natural affections, regardless of what Trinitarian constitution you live by, that of life in obedience to the creative order of things, or that of ancient practices where you're the master of your own destiny and you live by that. Either way, there's a path to rest wherever you land, wherever your camp is. And that's what I've experienced.
There's
working
another
with people.
interesting aspect of frequency that we call resonance as well. And probably the most classical illustration of that is that Memorex advertisement where there's a glass, a champagne glass, and this woman starts singing a note, and she pitches it to a certain point where the glass begins to shake, and then it bursts. And that's so her voice hit the same frequency as the glass's resonant frequency, and it caused it to burst. And there's been quite a few medical experiments based on that as well, as far as taking care of organisms and things like that. But when you take a look at that, so that's what you could call a destructive frequency. And if you consider the idea that if chaos is a destructive frequency, and it's continuing to sound off in your life, and it finds some resonant place in your life, that it begins to, it can destroy, and that's something to be considered, because if you find yourself in dis-ease, it's very likely that you have entered that place of resonant frequency with the negative, with the chaos.
And when people come and work with us, I have biofeedback technology, acoustic resonance technology, heart rate variability technology that helps us create a narrative around those disruptions.
Right, yeah.
Perhaps in closing, you can give us practical ideas instead of evaluating perhaps the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that we're dealing with, whether it's spiritually, physically, emotionally, in the context of relationships. Certainly we're experiencing this at state level, national level, political, global.
Yeah.
What are practical things that we can understand about energy, frequencies, and music that can bring us into alignment outside of just the regular narratives of circumstances?
Well, my thought on that is that first of all, we have to actively choose what is going to place us into that rest. It's not going to happen by accident. And that's going to be everything from the music we listen to, from the TV we watch, from the sources of news or whatever, movies we watch, people that we associate with. You know, the old saying, birds of a feather flock together. You know, if you find yourself in the middle of chaos and you're taking a clear look at what's going on around you, and you find that that's not part of the pattern you want to follow, you're going to have to make some choices, and those choices are going to have to be deliberate. And in the middle of those choices, you can reset your compass, as it were. You know, it's interesting. I used to do a lot of sailing, and every once in a while you have to take your compass in and have it recalibrated, because it will get off after a while.
Everything needs to be recalibrated.
Yeah.
Huh?
And so there has to be some point that you can trust that's steering you in the right direction. And once you know what that point is, then you're going to have to make some personal, sometimes tough decisions that are going to change your lifestyle so that you're not continuing down that track of chaos. You're actually shifting over to that track of rest. And that's something that it's going to be different for each person. I can't tell you what it's going to be for you. You can't tell what's going to be for me. But we can listen to each other and we can help each other be honest with each other. And I think that's the heart of what you're doing.
We get really practical. We
Yeah.
get into the science of it.
Yeah.
You've gone from the science of healing into really the art of healing.
Yeah.
And I kind of went more from the art of healing, which was photography. My work was published extensively nationally and all over the world. From that, I'm kind of going back to the heart of the science.
So I feel like my music is a tool for making that change. And I have many people that write and tell me exactly that in their lives. And then I think your program of rest is another tool that people can engage to find that rest. So they're compatible, companions in the and the world is looking for it.
Well, at the end of the day, it's like we were talking about earlier, when you have a 12-year-old that's suicidal, when your husband just walked out on you and you all of a sudden lost your primary source of income, when your child passed away from a heroin overdose. These are very practical, tangible things where people just don't know what to do.
What next? Yeah.
And they don't understand what's next. They don't even know how they can breathe.
Right.
So I am in a position where I have to come at this from all angles, not just one. However, I will say that your calming harp music that is on Spotify and it's on YouTube, and I know you have millions of followers all over the world. I do think that it's healing. And every single one of my clients, every single one of my patients is listening to your work. So, because it's doing for them as I teach them to abide a little bit and pause and process, this is doing for them what they can't do for themselves.
Right, yeah.
Not to mention, sometimes we don't have the capacity to read a scripture, read a psalm, and digest it. But with your music, they're hearing it, even if they can't read it.
Yeah. Well, that
displaces that negative energy.
And that's the thing. I find that a lot of people will write to me about, and it amazes me because they say they play the music in their home all day long, and they say because they're doing that, the whole atmosphere changes.
Well, because it's. I always say thoughts have power, but words have authority. And the resonance, because they all have a frequency, they have a resonance.
Right.
Hidden Messages in Water proves that. His research proves that. And so your music gives substance to that, and that's the story.
And I think there's just one more aspect about what I'm doing with the music is that it is coming out of the Psalms. So there actually are words associated with the chords that I'm playing. And even though you're not hearing the words, you're hearing the music of the words, which one person said, it's like the words are flying past me, So I think there's an extra dimension that's going on there that I didn't even understand.
It's mass.
At first.
It's what Einstein said. It's energy.
Yeah.
Energy has form, and whatever way it presents itself,
Yeah.
it has form. It's somebody very near and dear to my heart, and one of my old patients, who became a friend, who became an advisor to our foundation, passed away. And it was an amazing thing. He passed away here. I had the privilege of watching him launch at 3:30 in the morning. And it was an amazing thing to witness. And I never get tired of watching people leave time because mass substance leaves, and you know it the second it's happening. It happens. You watch it happen.
Yeah.
It's not the heart. It's not the organs. It's not this. It's when that mass, that breath of life, which also the spirit is the breath, is like a breath.
Well,
it's like the
energy
wind,
equals
right?
mass. Yeah,
Exactly.
right, yeah.
It goes, you know it. So energy, frequencies, resonance, pay attention to those things.
Right.
It's fruitful. It's meaningful. It's important to pay attention to those things.
It has more meaning in your life than you would ever believe.
Thank you.